I remember very well the first time this all started. I was only 7 years old, sleeping in my cozy bed in our San Francisco flat. My bedroom was part of an old San Francisco house turned into 2 flats years ago. We lived in the lower level flat. It was a cozy old building that was once a Victorian house, now modernized. As I sleep soundly, I had no idea what was about to happen to me. The most important experience of my life, and that it has been. Something totally unknown and strange was about to make itself known to me and forever change how I view reality. My life at this point had been average for a boy growing up in the 50s. My parents both worked and I went to school. I was an only child with no brothers or sisters. I had a large bedroom to myself that looked towards playland and the ocean. My interests were different than most kids my age. I had my eyes on the stars. I loved astronomy, art, science, and music. I still joke today that my first football was a telescope. I always wondered when I looked up at the night sky what was out there. This night, I would find out.
And I'm assuming that my mic is actually working this time. Everybody can hear me okay? Good. Because a couple of times I've missed it. So something I want to bring up before I bring Irena on is that starting next Thursday, there will be a live chat with my reflective glasses with just me. This is the last live show that we're doing. And from now on, we're recording the shows, which there's many reasons for doing it. I've recorded a number of shows already, and they're with some amazing people you have not maybe been introduced to before. And it just gives me more control, editorially speaking, and But we will have every Thursday night open chat with yours truly here. So I would usually tell you a bunch of other stuff, but I'm not going to. I'm going to bring Irena on because I'm excited to have her back. Hi. I'm not hearing your sound. You might be muted. Let's see. You are muted. Now you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I sure can.
Oh, okay.
Well, welcome back. Let's start off by. It's been a long time too, and I'm really curious what you've been up to, what's new, all that kind of stuff. But since the last time you were on the show, we have a lot more people on the channel that may not be familiar with you. So if you could be so kind as to share a little bit of your background with us to start with.
Well, my background is in scientific work. It's not in UFOs. And my PhD is in veterinary medicine. And I've been a professor. And I had a postdoc at Cornell and different positions like that. And prior, I had tried to get into astronomy when I was younger, and they didn't take females. And I'd tried to get in the back door. And so I wound up working for Defense Mapping Agency. And then I had worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency as a GS-11, which is PhD level, and had the SCI clearance and all that. And my job was identifying airplanes. So that was sort of along the line of UFOs, although it wasn't. And I also worked I had a job at Popular Mechanics, and I also worked as an astronomer at the Big Ear Telescope, the one that found the WOW signal.
Wow. No pun intended. Yeah. But, the fact that you are familiar with the cosmos, our skies, astronomy, and aircraft is something that most people who claim to know the difference between a satellite, 737, and an average drone piloted by a human being really don't know how to identify anything. You do. I have that too, because being a pilot, an aviator, and an amateur astronomer, I know what I'm looking at. But people are really good about telling you don't know, and because they don't know your background, and you have all of that.
Yeah, I have a pretty good background in the sciences, and I tried to get into astronomy, and I majored in it, although it didn't do me any good when they didn't take females, but I had a background.
That's just awful. It's better today, but small consolation. That's what you wanted to do. So also, I know that I know Philip Mantle, and I know that you co-authored that book that he wrote, and now he's got a final edition out. But you worked very, very closely with him and the people involved in that case, which, I mean, was that before or after you had the experience driving down the road that night?
What night?
Well, you last time you were on our show, you described that you had an experience with an unknown aircraft when you were driving.
That was way, way back. It wasn't
Right.
recently.
No. But did that have a lot to do with you getting an interest in the subject?
No. How it started was that I had sort of an experience, you might call it, when I was really young. And then I had several others, and that's how I got into it. But I went into the field of science, so I didn't talk about any of that until I was just about ready to retire.
Well, that's certainly understandable.
My first experience was when I was real young, but I had a witness.
Right. Could you share that with us again, just for the
Yeah.
people who haven't heard it.
It was when, I don't know exactly my age, and I don't remember if I was in school yet, around 6 or something.
Mhm.
And, my family was kind of poor. We were farmers, and my sister and I were sleeping in an upstairs attic room and two sides of the room. Back then, we'd been just recently farming with horses, and we had outdoor water and the whole deal. Things are pretty primitive, and no TV or anything like that. And my sister and I never heard of UFOs, and I don't know whether my parents had. But I woke up one night, and it was in summer, and I'm sure there was no storm going on for other reasons. But I saw this thing flying around the room, and it was just like a little, it looked actually like a literal tic tac, what they call that now, but it was sort of oblong, and it was flying
Mhm.
over the room, and it was lit up, it was dark, and our room was closed, the door and the window and everything were closed. And I saw it flying around the room, and I didn't know what it was, and I just looked at it. It didn't blink like a lightning bug or anything, and I didn't even
Mhm.
think of it being a lightning bug. I just didn't know what it was, and it flew around like it was kind of looking around, and it got close to both myself and my sister sometimes, and it was like it was browsing. And then I noticed that it didn't bump into anything, and the room was dark, and I couldn't see anything, but I knew where the furniture was. And if it went toward a wall or something, it turned before it bumped into things. So I thought, this, can see, or it knows where things are, which seems strange. And I watched it fly around for a while. And I didn't know my sister was awake, but she apparently woke up before I did. And then it flew up to the ceiling. And the ceiling had, it was attic room, and it had walls that came together, and there was about 3 feet between them at the top. And right in the middle of the room was a chandelier. And it went up toward the ceiling. It turned when it got to the ceiling. It went toward the chandelier. And then it seemed to know right where the chandelier was. And it began to circle. And it didn't feel its way around or bump into anything. It knew how to get between the chandelier and the wall. It circled and circled and circled and circled. And then it came down in a spiral. And then suddenly, my sister and I just became absolutely terrified. And we started screaming. I didn't know my sister was watching it or anything. And I didn't know she was awake. And we were so terrified, we ran out of the room and fell down the stairs. And then we couldn't get the door open because we were so terrified. And then we ran into our parents, and they didn't believe us. And so we went screaming to our parents, and they said, "Oh, that didn't happen." So that was
They
my
never do.
experience.
They never do.
Yeah. But
Did
what
they
was
tell you?
that is that when kids have that happen, it's usually one person. And
Mhm.
then the parents say, "You imagined it," and you believe them. But I didn't
Mhm.
believe them because my sister saw the same thing, and we both became terrified at the same time and everything. So I had good reason not to believe my parents on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was told I have a good imagination. I found out later that, of course, that my my mom anyway, before she passed, told me that she knew that stuff was going on back then, but it just wasn't talked about. Did you did you have anything else peculiar like that happen in your life?
Yeah, I've had other UFO sightings.
Mhm.
They were after I found out what UFOs were. This was several years before I ever heard of the subject. And I just found out later, that many years later, that kids sometimes see small objects in their room, and then sometimes the same people see UFOs later. Well, we both did. And
Mhm.
later, I had several experiences, and then my sister and I had a real um, long, involved UFO experience many years later together again.
Hmm. So from that point on, your life was pretty normal for someone who identifies aircraft and is involved in astrophysics and astronomy.
Yeah, it was pretty normal. It wasn't really normal. I went into science, which is pretty odd for females back then. But so I became a professor for a while and had some other positions working on grants and different positions in scientific work.
Right. I know. I remember in high school during the 60s, the late 60s. I was in high school. I didn't graduate till 1970. But during that time, I tend to hang out with geeky people like myself. And I knew a lot of girls that were very interested in science. But I remember back in those days not thinking that they would have a problem. I wouldn't see why there'd be a problem, but it's sad to hear that was. And of course, we also know that people trying to go to work for NASA too. If you were a man, you would probably get hired, especially if you were a white man, and certainly not a woman. So it's just bad stuff. So at what point did you get involved with MUFON and in investigating? What got you to that point?
Actually, I kind of stayed away from UFOs. I was kind of interested because I'd had several sightings and close encounters and everything else. But due to my field, I didn't want everybody to, say you're crazy and,
Yeah.
So I didn't talk about
They
it.
still do that. They still do that. Not as bad, but they do.
Yeah. And so anyway, the thing that Philip Mann and I are working on had something to do with me getting into it because way back in 1973 when the Pascagoula thing happened, well, I got a phone call from my mother. I was living in Missouri and she was living in Ohio. And she called and said, called and said that she and Dad had heard a strange noise, like an explosion or something. And I joked with her because, there was that many miles between us. I couldn't possibly hear anything from Ohio. And she kept asking me, did you hear that? And she had said once that if we ever thought she was getting dementia, we should tell her. And so I told her, you're off, and, jokingly. And then several days later, she's a real skeptic. She called and said there was a real big UFO wave there and that people were hiding in their basements at night and not going out and things like that, which is strange for her. And then I forgot about the whole thing for years and years. But later I was working at Ohio State University and they had a newspaper room. And one day, just on impulse, I walked in and decided to see if I could figure out when I got that phone call from Mom. And so I went in, there was a newspaper room with real live newspapers, which they don't have anymore. They just have microfilm. But anyway, I went in the newspaper room and there was this huge vault of newspapers. And I thought, I'll never find that. But I made a guess at the month and date and things like that and went in to look. And I actually found it. And it was the Pascagoula case that made the news on account of an abduction. But there was also a sound at the same time. And I didn't pay attention to the abduction because that just sounded like weird stuff. I paid attention to the sound. And there was a strange sound that went across the country. And that was what my mother had called me about. And so for some reason, I just got interested and started looking at this and trying to figure it out because there didn't seem to be a cause for the sound. And later I'd collected a lot of newspapers and it said this mystery sound went across, big section of the United States and nobody could explain it. And I published that in I had sent it in, submitted it, and the state geologist, and who was the state of Ohio seismologist, contacted me and helped me find seismograph recordings at that time and things. So I published in the scientific literature. Well, I wasn't in UFOs or anything at that time, but I wrote that up for an English class, and I thought the professor would think I was crazy, and he didn't. And he'd had sightings of his own and written them up. Reader's Digest. So anyway, later some people found out about that I had written this paper and asked me to give a presentation. And so I did on the sound, and it was about Pascagoula. And I went to a meeting and met these ufologists, all kinds of people like Richard Huffman and Ohio people. And I think Stanton Freeman was there, but I didn't know who he was.
That name comes to mind. I love Stan. He was amazing.
Yeah. And so that sort of got me into UFOs, and later I joined the MUFON and CUFOS and another local one in Ohio, and started doing some investigation. And then but I was kind of low level about it until after I retired.
Right. Yeah, I know. I've heard from people that knew Carl Sagan that he knew there was substance to this phenomenon, but again, because of his position and his job and his career, he remained very skeptical on camera to the public. But he, unlike Tyson, he was very kind about it, because he was a very kind man and he was a very intelligent man. But when I found out that he actually realized that he did know secretly that there was something to it, that there really was something going on, amazing. I was glad to hear that, because I always liked him. But I understand being a scientist, having a career, and being respected, and having a lot of your colleagues being very much trapped in this little box they're afraid to go out of. You have to be careful. You know? The minute you go outside of it, oh, you're nuts, and we won't hire you, and that's the end of that. So, so when you started to work with Philip on the book, you must have gotten much, much more deeper into that case and that story and the lives of those two people. I know that later on, the recording that the police secretly were recording of them when they left the room, which is something they did, came up. And I remember hearing it, and, you know, I would imagine that up until that point, people were, you know, very skeptical, as they are. A lot of them just thought, you know, they must be lying, or they were drunk. As one podcaster on YouTube said, they were doing a lot of drinking, which I know wasn't true. But that recording, although it's not proof, it's proof that they actually experienced something as they described it, and were very concerned about it. What did you think about that recording?
Well, I thought the police did a real good job of investigating, and that's why the thing is so strong, is that a lot of times somebody reports something and they don't pay attention to it. And in this case, the police interviewed them separately, then interviewed them together, put them in the room together. The interviewer walked out, and they had a tape recorder hidden there. And that was because the police didn't want to make them to make fools of them. I mean, if they were hoaxing, well, they wanted to get their private conversations. And when they heard the private conversations, the two men were just out of their minds in fear. I mean, they were practically having heart attacks. And they could tell that something happened to them. It was real sincere.
Yeah.
But they were interviewed by a number of people, including at the Air Force Base, colonels and things like that interviewed him. And so they did a pretty good investigation of it.
Did Dr. J. Allen Hynek investigate it? I can't recall.
Yes, he
myself.
did. So did Dr. Harder. And both of them said there was no reason. I mean, they didn't, being conservative and scientists, they didn't say, well, this actually happened. But they said the two people were sincere. And they didn't see anything, wrong with the people or anything like that.
Right. No. And I remember them talking. I haven't reviewed the case in a while, but I have a pretty good memory of the things that transpired. And I do recall that they had yet another visit from the same beings that were concerned about them and how what happened to them affected them.
Yeah, they both had other experiences. And Charles Hickson, the older one, in one of his experiences, he and his family were driving, I think in the country or something, and they saw a UFO. I mean, the whole family did. And I don't remember if it landed or not, but anyway, they were close to it. And his wife was just terrified of the things. I guess she was afraid they'd come back and do something to him. And so they didn't stop and, investigate. They just shot on by. But the whole family saw it. And then Calvin Parker had a couple of experiences, and in one of them, he didn't talk about it for years and years and years, and we just sort of found out about it kind of like after he died. But he had an experience in 1992 and in 1993. And when he had the first experience, there'd been a woman with him. And then in 1992, when the woman, he saw her again. And so he had several experiences afterwards too.
Was he or either one of them ever put under hypnosis by someone professional to find out if there was more details that they may have not recalled? Because that's what happens a lot of times when people are taken, is that a lot of their memory is blocked.
Yeah, they were both hypnotized right after it happened. I think the next day or so.
Wow.
When the sightings came, yeah. And what the hypnotist mainly found out was that they were sincere because they expressed all kinds of terror then. But then they were hypnotized later, and Calvin didn't talk about it for around 50 years. Charles was older. He'd been in the military. He'd been in life and death situations. And he thought, compared to being in a life and death situation, he could stand all the harassment that people were going to do. And they really got harassed.
Oh, yeah.
And
despite the evidence.
Yeah.
Because they're afraid. They don't want to accept it.
Yeah. They were very harassed. But he went on several, national shows and described what happened. And he stuck to right what he said happened. I mean, he said this thing was levitating and that they went aboard and that he was in a room that was really, really lit up. And something like an eye came toward him. And then it was like it surrounded him, like it scanned him. And he always said that. He never, ever said anything else. But Calvin, he didn't talk about it for like 50 years. And he didn't talk about it to anybody, including his wife or anybody. And they always say, that people that talk about abductions are hoaxing to get attention. Well, he didn't want the attention. He wanted to live a normal life and all that. And not be like a freak, like if you walk in the room, somebody says, see any UFOs and all that. And so he ran away from it, didn't talk about it for many, many years, maybe just a little bit. But then finally, toward the end of his life, his wife started saying, "You might say something."
Mm-hmm.
And I think the impression of harassing people cleared up around that 2017 article in the New York Times, and it made it a little bit more respectable. And his wife suggested he talk about it. And finally, he started talking about it, and then he wrote 2 books and went into a lot of detail. And he expected to just get harassed, but they were very well accepted and became bestsellers and everything, and people were very interested. And he was respected instead of harassed.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of people today that feel that is one of the most significant cases on record dealing with this sort of thing. And it probably is because of all the evidence. I mean, it's not just their testimony, but there are people who didn't talk about it, who saw the craft over the water. It would have been about the time that they were being taken. So it was verified from very different angles and by different people. Of course, the skeptics said, "Well, they're just coming forward to get attention." Well, it clearly wasn't the case. They just wanted to say, "I saw that." They wanted to back them up because they probably thought what they were seeing, they better not share with anybody because maybe they were seeing things or they wouldn't be believed after they heard those 2 gentlemen speak about their experience. It brought some more people forward, and it was quite a few, as I recall.
Well, yeah, that's what we investigate in a different way, because a lot of the investigators, when somebody says they're abducted or something, they psychoanalyze them and say, "Well, you saw this because of, you're crazy and all that." Well, people don't look for sightings at the same time. And with this, we had the person in the police station that was collecting the calls and writing them down and stuff. And he said that very night, he got calls from around 50 people reporting something odd. And that there were other people that came in, and then there were about 20 people passing by on a bridge. So from the area, there were a lot of witnesses. But at that time, nobody knew that there was an abduction going on or anything else, because it hadn't been in the news yet. And so all these people were calling in because they saw something odd. And it wasn't because they were seeking attention, which they wouldn't do because they'd get harassed anyway.
Yeah.
And also, there wasn't any place to report it to. And like Charles had to try several places before he was even able to report it. And people would call the airport, and they would say, the Air Force Base, and they'd say, "No, no flying saucers, this doesn't exist," and refuse to take it. So he had even trouble reporting it, but other people managed to report it even under the harassment and all the stress of not being able to report it any place. So there were a lot of people that saw it. That saw, something very, very strange that was enough to make them try to, report it even after all the obstacles. And then we've continued to investigate, and we found a lot more.
Well, what did you find?
We found a lot more people that had seen something that didn't report because of the harassment and things. But a lot of them reported to somebody else at that time, like their family and things. And so the first person I interviewed was Maria Blair, and she and her husband were waiting for a ship to come in because her husband and another person were going out and provisioning some oil wells. And they were sitting out there, and she said she saw this thing flying around, and she thought, "What's this?" it looked like she thought it was an airplane, but she said there was no place to land, and the airplane just flying around, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. And then she said that her husband decided to take his clothes to the boat, and so at 9 o'clock they walked down the pier of the boat. And she said as she was walking behind her husband, this thing flopped up on the pier, and she said it looked just like a man. And I asked her, is it a fish? Is it a porpoise? And she said, no, it looked like a man. And she was terrified. She was just really emotional. And they went on down to the ship. And then at 12 o'clock at night, she came back later. And this seems strange for two reasons. This thing that flopped up on the deck seemed pretty weird. And then it seemed also weird that she was on the ship for like 3 hours and they didn't seem to be doing anything. And so I kept talking to her and talking to her and talking to her for several years. And then finally her husband, who was a skeptic, who had also been a skeptic, he became very ill and unfortunately died not too long later. But right before they put him on a ventilator, and when you're on a ventilator, you can't talk, but right before that, he told her that they had been abducted. And then he remembered it, but he had never talked about it.
Wow.
And so how we found out about it, they didn't report their daughter. Calvin was on YouTube giving a speech or something, and one of their daughters wrote in the notes that their mother had seen the abduction, that their parents had seen the abduction, and they were right across the river from where it happened, but they didn't know what was happening at that time. They just saw something going on. And then it came out in the news the next day, and they had seen it, but they didn't say anything about it. The only person that said anything about it was their daughter. And Philip gave me the name of Maria to call. And so we found out there may have been a different abduction. They might have actually seen the abduction themselves. So there might have been two abductions at the same time, which is pretty weird.
Well, evidently they had they had a lot to do. It wasn't just Calvin and Charles. It was they were doing more of it. Did you, in investigating at that particular space and time that all this was going on, were there a lot of sightings before their case happened and afterwards?
You mean by days or hours? Up before that day, there were a number of UFO sightings. It was sort of like it was gradually building up, the number of sightings, and they were especially around the golf course and things. Then when that happened, there were a whole lot of sightings that very time, like that time or hours before, hours later. But a lot of times the people didn't remember exactly what time. They just remembered that they saw something, and then the next day it came out in the news. So then they'd know what day it was because they could remember that. I mean, that's something you'd remember. You wouldn't just remember it if nothing happened on the news or something, but they had something to tie it down to.
Right.
And then at the same time, there had been that sound that swept across the country, and that made the newspapers, and it made the newspapers with UFOs because nobody could figure out what it was. So that happened at the same time. So I think there were a lot of people that reported due to that. And I imagine a lot of people heard the noise too. And I think that also increased the number of people that were reporting.
As I recall, during that time, of course, I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was in Pacifica, and I was out of high school, and all during the late 60s and early 70s, there were a lot of sightings going on there too. It seemed to me that there was a big flap at that time. And do you recall, because I don't, was there a lot of activity going on in the Hudson Valley at that same time. I seem to remember that there was.
I remember there was a lot of activity in the Hudson Valley, and I can't remember the dates though.
Yeah, but I get the feeling it was right around the same time. And you have a question from Flea Market.
It started, I think people, as my research showed, it started in Iowa, and it was heard all the way across the country to around the Washington, D.C. area, Maryland, and Virginia and things. And the newspapers reported it as a sonic boom, but I'm not too sure if that's exact. There wasn't any airplane or any explanation for it. It was a lot larger than a sonic boom from an airplane. And people that heard it and knew what a sonic boom said, it sounded different, but it was such that, like at that time, there were lots of sonic booms because there were airplanes flying around making sonic booms, and people knew what they were. But this made the newspapers all the way across the country, so it wasn't a normal sound. And my parents said explosion, but they sent fire engines out and things like that, and it cracked windows and things.
What was the duration of the sound?
It was on different time zones, but I think it was maybe 20 minutes or something.
So the sound continued that long?
Well, it went across the country.
Right.
It was about 3 times the speed of sound. And it from the time it started, which it was in Central Time, and the time it ended about 9 o'clock. And it started, maybe 20 minutes before that or something. So it swept across the country. It didn't just happen all at once.
Sound is pretty slow.
Yeah.
And knowing aircraft as you do, and as I know, that would seem to indicate if it was some kind of shock wave in going through the sound barrier, that had been a pretty big event or a very large object to cause that, I would think.
Well, it didn't go along with the laws of physics because at first they explained it as a SR-71, which is an airplane that.
Sure, I know the Blackbird. I have a model when I fly.
Yeah, well, they first explained it as that, but then they know the size of the carpet of an SR-71 for how high they are and how wide their sonic boom carpet is and things like that. Well, this is way larger than the sonic boom carpet of the best airplane. And so at first they explained it as that, and then after the next day they were saying, well, this is way too big to be a sonic boom. But and when I went through the newspapers, it was way larger than a sonic boom. But what was strange about it was that you can calculate the size of a sonic boom and calculate how high the airplane would be. And when I calculated from the size of the boom, the airplane would be like 50 miles high. And at that, there wouldn't be very many molecules and you wouldn't hear a sound at all. And instead it was breaking windows and things like that, which didn't make sense in terms of physics at all, because there was this huge pressure wave that was, shattering windows and things, but it was so wide, the aircraft would have to be way up. So physically, if you took, the principles of physics, it made no sense at all. And so I did all kinds of calculations to board them in my one book, but it just didn't make any sense.
Wow. I would imagine that civilizations and beings of intelligence, non-human intelligence, is much further along than physics than we are, and we are only now getting really comfortable with quantum physics. So it doesn't really surprise me. It doesn't mean that sound came from something not of this earth, but There hasn't been another sound like that to this date, has there?
Not that I know of. I mean, there's strange sounds, but I never saw anyone like that.
Yeah.
And
And
people
you
write
actually
me all the time and tell me
got
about
to hear it.
sounds. Huh?
Right. You actually got to hear it.
No, I didn't hear it, but my parents did. And
Oh, they did. Okay.
they were farmers, and I was surprised that they would make a long distance call because that called money. It cost money, and call me up and say, "What is this? Did you hear it?" And
That
things
must
like
have been
that.
that's pretty impressive. So going back, I see my dog wants to get into the studio. She's scratching at the door. Here we go. There you go, Nova. Always name your dog after an exploding star.
Oh, there's a question.
Oh yes.
Okay, it happened just about the same time as the abduction. It happened October the 11th, and that's when the abduction was.
I think she was asking what year too.
Oh, 1973.
Yeah, I was just about to come to Hollywood, or in the process of
Wow.
coming down this direction where I am now.
Wow.
And when I got here, the sightings for me just kept going on and on and on. But that's another story. I'm thinking about Calvin and Charlie, and I'm thinking about what, after all that time, they must have had come to some kind of conclusion in their mind that what the non-human intelligence intentions might have been, and also I don't think they ever really got a good look at them.
Well, like the standard opinion of what a alien looks like, and there's several standards, but a lot of them are called like grays that are small, skinny things with big heads.
I'm very familiar with them. Yes.
Well, these are different from any description done.
Oh yeah.
These were sort of chunky. They were shorter. They had their skin was kind of like elephant skin, or like waves of chunkiness. They didn't have eyes. They had maybe projections or something out. I'm not real sure though, because one time they had projections like where a person have ears and a nose. They kind of had projections. It was kind of like they were very roughly shaped like a human, and then somebody said, "Well, that's close enough for government work," or something like that.
Right.
And in one description, Charles said that the ears were retractable, and so they didn't seem to have eyes, but they seemed to know where they were going, and they both thought that they were robotic, and both of them thought they were more robots or machines than people, than entities.
Wow. Did they get any sense of communication, whether verbally or telepathically in any way?
I guess they got a telepathic impression that that they weren't going to be harmed. They were
common.
paralyzed when this happened, though. I mean, as soon as they saw this light, well, they were instantly paralyzed. Their brains were working. They could see, and it was kind of different from the anesthesia of those times, because I think, when you got anesthetized, you went out, but they were able to see and, conscious. They were conscious, so far as I know, during the whole thing. But Calvin, he talked to something that looked like a human female.
So there may have been on board this craft with the robotic looking creatures, people that looked human.
Yeah.
That would kind of make sense.
Yeah, he didn't think she was real human, but he thought she resembled a human. And
how did? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, nothing. Later he said that she gave him. She made predictions. There's a question there. That she made predictions about the future, that there's going to be wars and plagues and things like that, and maybe the end of the world and things. And so she made some predictions too. There was a question on there, and I couldn't read it. Oh, is that okay?
Yeah.
I think that with my science background, the question is about time, whether it's linear or not. And our quantum mechanic experiments, some of them are about entangled particles. And in this case, like in Einstein's theory, we're supposed to always be under the speed of light. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. And the reason they say that is because it's what's measured. No matter what speed you're going, if you measure the speed of light, it's always the same. And so Einstein wrote math to adjust for that. I mean, it makes no sense at all, but that's the way the world is. But anyway, so we see time is going by in units and things, but with the entangled. And so, if you're on one end of the universe, it takes a long time to get to the other end because light, goes zillions of.
It's slow.
Yeah.
Very slow.
Yeah, it'd take forever to get across the universe. However, an entangled particle, the two entangled particles, even if one's on the other end of the universe, they would automatically know what each other's doing, which makes no sense at all and suggests that our idea of time is defective, that, maybe there's other times and we are in our own little time zone where we see time as going around in sequences, but maybe it isn't.
It sounds to me that science hasn't done enough study into the nature of consciousness, because I think that's the key with that. Then it would make more sense.
Okay, unrelated sound questions. Have any of you heard of the loud alarm that happens right before you can roll out? No, I don't know anything about that.
No, I've never. I've had the experience of leaving my body, and it was the first time it happened. It was pretty scary, but I don't remember a noise. But leaving your body, of course, is if it happens to you, the first thing you think about is that I'm not going to get back. I must be dying, and all that goes to your head. It takes a while to get past that. But going back to your work on that case, what were their reflections about the whole thing? I mean, before they passed, and they must have had come to terms on some level with that experience and felt that some knowledge about life and existence was imparted on them as a result of that experience.
Well, with Calvin, he just recently died, and he gave a paper to Philip Mantle to look at after he died, and he talked about the predictions and things, and then he said that these entities, whatever they were, had passed through the same stages that we did, and that they were kind of like helping us or something, and that the human race may be in for some bad times in the future and that sort of thing too.
I hear this all the time, and not just from their case, but from so many cases right up to the present. It seems to be a constant theme. I know a lot of intelligent people who have these experiences have that on their mind, because they look at the news, they pay attention to what's happening to the earth and to science, and so they're aware that we're heading towards danger. But the amount of it that's happening, and to people who aren't necessarily thinking about those things, are getting the same experience within their experience, that they're being warned, that this presence is here to help us. It's not something that's happened. It's not the first time that it's happened in the non-human intelligence experience. They have been doing this evidently to planets that are on the edge of collapse of civilization, that they or destroying their own planet, that they assist, but they do it in such a way that they don't bring ontological shock to the public. And from my investigation and study and actual experience with abduction, I don't like to call it that, but I find this to be true for myself. I don't expect it to be true for anyone else, but there's a lot of us that feel this way. So in hearing that he felt that way and reported those things, it's very well in keeping. It's said that there's more than the Greys. There's other life forms coming from other worlds, maybe even other parallel existences or realities, but they seem to work together. Because it'd be my hope if someone reaches such an advanced state that they become a civilization that has the same knowledge base. They share the same truths, the same science, the same facts. And so there's really nothing to fight or struggle with each other about anymore. You just simply work together in advancing towards your future and exploration of reality. I think that's something that's eventually going to happen for us, but it might be that this has been going on like this for millions of years in this one particular universe. Now we know there might be more than one. So I find it comforting in light of all the negative stuff that's coming out from a lot of people lately, saying that these visitors are evil and they're taking people against their will, and they're a threat, and the whistleblowers are saying it's a threat to us. But I find that human beings themselves are a much greater threat to themselves than the people that picked up.
Yeah, that's what he said, is that the being said that, we think of a threat of ending the world like a meteor or volcano. Or something. He said that's what the worst threat is us.
Yeah.
I mean, to think of us as dangerous instead of something else causing end of the world.
So Irena, what are you continuing to work and investigate the subject matter?
Yeah, I'm working on another book, which I hope comes out this year. It's supposed to, and it's about Pascagoula, but it's about some things that nobody thought about. One part of it is about abductions, and it seemed, I talked to a lot of people, that had other witnesses and things, and what was interesting was a lot of them seemed to have almost like abductions too. I mean, you could look at what they report and you think there might have been an abduction there. And so I was sort of thinking about abductions, and that there's a lot more to abductions than, I mean, it's pictured as being taken up into a UFO, like we do experiments on animals and looking, investigating things like that. But a lot of the components of abduction are that the laws of physics just go out the window. I mean, like these UFOs, they're not, trudging along with gravity, they're floating. And when people are abducted, they just levitate. And things go through walls and things.
Yes, pass through solid objects. The craft do it too.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes rid of all our laws of physics. And so I was thinking that abductions may not be, what they're presented as being captured by, something and taken aboard and studied like we do to animals. It may be something that has to do with physics and quantum mechanics and the whole thing. It may be a whole lot more complicated And maybe they talk about screen memories. Maybe the abduction is a screen memory for something else, because there's a lot of other things that are reported during abductions than just the abduction.
Mm-hmm.
That nobody seems to pay attention to.
I try to pay attention to everything that I can. And, the consistency is amazing, with people that have had these experiences, and how it's affected their lives, and it caused them to have the life choices they've had, the fields they've gone into, the interest that they've had in certain subjects. And it always seems to go back for many of them, I would say about 70%, to childhood. It started in childhood, and their memories in childhood of interacting with these beings were not a frightening and terrifying thing. They may have been initially, but it became something that so many of them looked forward to. And actually, when they would be put back and the craft would leave, they felt almost a sense of abandonment and missed them, and sadness until they came back again. So that I hear that from so many people, and people who, so many of these people are not interested or weren't interested in UFOs or this subject at all, but they had this in their life, and they thought, and they kept it private. But the minute that they, some point in their life, got exposed to someone else, whether it had been a book or maybe they saw a show, realized, oh, that wasn't just me. I wasn't just being crazy or having childhood imagination. And then it becomes, like an onion, it just peels out forever, and they find, oh my God. And so they realize they're part of something, that they're not alone with it. And so many of them have this relationship with the non-human intelligence that really is not something evil or frightening or a threat. That's what I've found. What have you?
There's a question.
Sure.
Should I answer that? It'll take me a long time to answer it.
Go ahead and answer it. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm Judy. Okay, Judy here had some very intense experiences, and in fact, we did one of our films about her experience, and so she's very familiar. She's one of the very people that I was talking to you about that have had these experiences.
Well, this took this experience took more than one day, and it was traveled geographically through several states. But it was with my sister. We had our first experience in Ohio, and then we were both living on the East Coast. I was in Washington working for the DIA, and she was at New Jersey at Drew University taking postgraduate work. And so we decided to go up and see the New England states because we were both on that end of the country. And I'll try to get it shorter. We were in Boston, and we were looking for a place to stay, and we couldn't find, all the motels were filled up. And so we were going to go to the Outer Belt and look. And so we were driving out of Boston, and there was an airport south of us, the Norwood Memorial Airport, and we could see airplanes coming in, putting their landing lights on and everything. And we also saw this other thing, and it was blinking. It was just one light, and we kept seeing it. And we started arguing about it, and she said something was odd about it. She was watching it and has real good eyesight, and she said later that it'd be one place, then it'd be someplace else. And, I thought she was crazy and told her it was a helicopter. And so we were driving, we got off the Outer Belt, and we were driving on 95 South, and I passed this, it was like a globe that was near the ground, and there was a light on the inside that just went to a spectrum, like I think it was red and blue, and they blended purple and then went back and forth. It was like something was rotating around it, and I'd never seen anything like it and had no idea what it was. But the inside of the car turned green, and it stayed green for a while, and then it wasn't green. And I kept on going, and finally my sister kept saying, stop, it's going to go over the car. And I thought she was crazy. And finally I stopped while she was screaming at me. And I pointed out the window and I was going to say, dingbat, that's a helicopter. And just then I saw something off in the distance that looked like a meteor. And then just immediately, the same place, there was this big thing coming over. And I knew it wasn't a helicopter then. But she said just about the same time it started that the thing shone a beam of light into our car. It was sort of like blue light. I didn't see that though, but I was on toward the window. But anyway, the next thing, this thing came over, and it had, when at that time, it was real low, slow. It made no noise at all. I had seen blimps with, lighted sides and things like that. And I even have a YouTube thing with lighted blimps on things. Mm-hmm. And this was nothing like a blimp. And we both looked at it, and it levitated. It was making no sound. It had a row of 7 windows. And are these panels or windows? We discussed, we both thought they were windows. It had a little red light on one end, a little green light on the other. And the windows were blinking in a sequence. And I don't remember the sequence exactly. Something like the first 3 would blink, then all 7, and then the last 4, and then go through that cycle again. And so anyway, we were watching it and trying to figure out what it was. And I was in photography for the DIA. That was my field, photography. And I had it was 1968, and they didn't have, iPhones, but I had a Polaroid with high-speed film. And so I got the film out in the Polaroid and got it loaded, and I was loading it and everything. And I thought, boy, I can get an amazing picture. Not only can I get a picture of the inside of a UFO, but I could get one that proves that they exist, because this thing was levitating on by, and I'd get the freeway and everything. And so just then a truck driver parked in front of us and came back and stood right beside me, right when I wanted to take the picture, the perfect picture that was just a miracle. And so I was scared to take the picture. I looked at him, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I thought this was a really strange question, because this big thing was there. And I pointed at it and said, "What is it?" I didn't want to say UFO to a strange, right, truck driver. And so he turned around, pointed exactly the opposite direction to where I was pointing, and said, and then he turned around and said, "I don't see anything." And, this made no sense to me. And then he asked the same question again, "What are you doing?" And so I pointed at it and said, "What's this?" And he turned around and pointed his head in exactly the opposite direction and turned back around. Wow. "I don't see anything." And then he gave me some signal that made me think he was calling me crazy, like he pointed at his head or shook his head, something like that, that whatever his gesture was, I understood he was calling me crazy. But then the thing went to the airport, and he went back to his truck and just sat there watching us. The thing went to the airport, and while it was on the way, I was still trying to get the picture. And finally, my sister said that apparently while I found out years later that she didn't know he was there, although she knew when I was talking to him. She said that it took me a long time to get the film and the camera, but she apparently didn't know he was there. And she said after it suddenly got in a different place. Well, at that time, I had decided that I couldn't get a picture on account of lens flares in the freeway. So there was a hill, and I ran up to the top of the hill, and I did get a picture. And actually, I published it in a scientific journal later. But then I came down, and I went to the airport and started circling in this real geometric fashion. And my sister was trying to figure out what on earth is inside it, because we couldn't see anything. And I wanted to get the picture. And so I drove back to the freeway, and I didn't know what way it was going to go, but I decided I would go down the freeway and turn around and come back. Well, the truck driver got right in behind us. He rode my bumper about a foot behind me. His bright lights were shining in my mirror and blinding me, so I couldn't drive. And he wasn't trying to get around me or anything. If I slowed down, he slowed down. If I switched lanes, he right behind me. And so I thought we were going to get killed. And I said goodbye to my sister. It's been nice knowing you and everything. And I thought that was the end. And so anyway, I thought what I'd do is go in the left-hand lane. And then when I came to the next intersection, I would swerve off the road as fast as possible and maybe I'd get rid of it. And it worked, and we didn't get killed, because if somebody had been coming up the other lane, we'd have been in a bad accident. So I went back, and I went back, and the thing was still along the freeway, and the car lit up in green again. And then we got way away, and I couldn't follow it anymore. And then later, we drove back to Drew because we couldn't find a place to stay, and we probably had missing time. It was years later when I figured that out. And then I had a poltergeist experience that night. But anyway, I had written it up immediately afterwards, and we found out years later that my sister had written up. We found her write-up too, so we'd both written it up. So anyway, that in general, that's what happened.
Wow. And did you ever look into that missing time? I mean, I get the feeling you didn't, otherwise you'd have more to say, or is that not something that
I don't hypnotize at all. I mean,
you don't. Some people don't. Yeah.
Tried to hypnotize me, other people did, and it just doesn't work at all on me.
Well, that was a heck of an experience, and I get the feeling that the truck driver knew you were seeing something, and somebody didn't want you to see that, and maybe they sent him out. I don't know, or maybe that. I mean, the fact that he wouldn't even look in that direction; he just turned his back on it, and point the other way is really odd. But I do know that stuff like this happens because when I was in Toluca Lake, and that was in the around that 70. Yeah, that would have been around 78. Some girlfriends of mine were driving to my place, and they saw it was just after sunset. There was still some light in the sky, just enough that they could see this dark disc going down the street on the street where they're driving in their neighborhood. And they got out and they tried to get people to look at it. And they didn't see it, or they wouldn't look at it. And the darn thing went over to where my apartment is, and that's where it disappeared. And then how I found out about this is they were banging on my door. They were scared to death, and they said, because they knew about me and they knew how I felt about UFOs, and they did not want to have seen this or experienced this. They were so shook up and ruined the whole night. We were supposed to go out and have dinner and do all these things, and it just never happened. All they wanted to do was talk about it. What the hell did they just see? But those people couldn't see it, or they wouldn't see it, or they had a mental block against it.
Well, for a long time, I thought this must be a real man. But, when you point at something, even a dog or something will look in that direction. Well, he obviously looked in the opposite direction. So he knew where it was. He looked in the opposite direction. But then just recently, my sister found the letter that she wrote that day when it happened. And so I asked her, and she remembered the truck driver coming toward us and chasing us, but she didn't remember talking to him at all. So I wondered, we had two different memories then. Maybe she was just so concentrating that she didn't pay attention to, that I was talking to the truck driver. But it made me wonder if either something was implanted in my brain or something was deleted from hers or something like that too.
Well, as you well know, being the researcher you are, this is not an uncommon thing.
I know.
Flea Market wanted me to talk about what happened last night, and it really wasn't much, but Mary and I, now that things are warming up, we're back outside. We own a Celestron telescope, an X-Star. We have a night vision camera. We've got Sony A7. We got a bunch of really cool stuff and Celestron binoculars, and we like to go sit in the back and see what we can see. And we see a lot of things. And last night, we're just seeing aircraft and satellites, just tons of them. And, there really was nothing happening. And then I always wanted to try just closing my eyes and meditating and trying to, like, on some conscious level, see if I couldn't reach something. And we both did that. And after we opened our eyes, it was only a few beats later that we captured this object. Well, we saw it, and I knew right away it wasn't an aircraft because it did not have nav lights or anti-collision lights or strobes or anything like that. It was completely clean and just this bright light, and it was really too large to be a satellite in its profile. And if it had been ISS, it would have been traveling the other direction. So it wasn't ISS, although ISS was around that time because it was about 9 something at night. 9:05, right around there. I can show you what we got. The problem with night scopes is that they're infrared based, and so they will make something glow more than it does to the unaided eye.
I have night vision cameras out around my place and photograph wildlife and things.
So
I see a lot of night vision.
Let's see. Videos. There it is. Okay, so we'll run this, and
boy, it's awfully fast too.
No, it isn't. It's slowing way down. Look how slow it's getting.
that was the other thing too. Is it really seemed to almost stop at points?
No, I don't
And
either.
then move again, which our satellites
I don't
do.
either.
And it was
And
very
it's
reddish.
slowing down to like a really, really slow pace.
That's the slowest moving satellite I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, that I don't know what it is. That's not a satellite.
Well, I did meditate.
It's not an airplane.
I did meditate with my eyes closed for a long time and said, could I, you know.
It's not,
This night scope will actually pick up the Milky
No.
Way. Even though
No,
we're
it's
pretty much in
moving
space.
way slow.
yeah. You can come back now this way.
Whoa, it's like red. The whole thing is kind of red in the scope.
You saw in the camera and with your eyes.
That is definitely unknown.
Yeah,
There's
I
no
can see it in
any
camera.
collision
I
lights
saw
on
with
it.
my eyes
Nope.
first. I
There's no
immediately put
strobes.
the
Nope.
camera on it, and then I would kind of open the other eye,
Did it
make sure I
stop?
could still
It
see
looked
it
like it kind of.
visually
Thank you.
unaided, and I could.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then it faded, but it wasn't
Could
traveling.
you come back this way?
Yes.
It was traveling more north to south than east to west. So I mean, from west
Yeah,
to east.
it's really,
And when
really
satellites
moving
travel
slow.
from,
Or it's not a
west to
satellite,
east,
that's for
they go
sure.
into the shadow of the earth and they dim out.
There's a little bit of light on
This
the
was
other
more
side
parallel.
too.
It's about to go into the trees.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is. Wow, look at it's really moving slow.
Let's change direction.
I wish
Yeah,
it
and it
would
kind
come
of
back
turned
over us.
too. I mean, it did an arc from the time we saw it.
Change
So
directions and come back this way.
Thank you.
now, right about this, you see
There's
there's an
another
aircraft
object.
coming. You can see the
That's a
green
plane.
That's a plane going the other direction.
nav light on
Oh,
it, and you see
it's-
the other one
It's gotten
start to dim out.
There's another plane too.
yeah, way dimmer.
Yeah,
I could,
that-
there it goes.
It
It's
only picked up the
disappearing.
green nav
Yeah.
light. I didn't stay on
Wow.
it long enough for it to get close enough to see the
That was
anti-collision
right.
lights in the room.
That was not.
No, hey.
So that was interesting.
I
we've caught
remember
other
very
things.
well the first time this all
how come
started.
wait a minute, what's
I was
going
only
on
7
here?
years old.
Let's remove that. There we go.
Neat.
Yeah, the first night that we got the scope, we picked up something that was triangular shape, moving very quickly, and it sort of descended to the horizon in the east. So, and then after that, it started getting cold and overcast because we live right by the ocean. But now it's clearing up again, and so this is a great time for hunting. Of course, we already had someone call us names saying we were stupid because we didn't realize that was a satellite, but he obviously didn't know much about.
Well, you can look up
aerospace.
where satellites are. I mean, you can find.
Yeah, it's very easy to do,
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is that if it was ISS, it was in the wrong location. Close,
there's
but
Chinese satellite too, and you can even see other satellites too. I mean, that aren't
Yeah.
the stations.
Oh, tons of them. It's like when I use that night scope and I look up, it's just nuts how much stuff's and going in all different directions. But then the stuff that stands out doesn't move, doesn't have that kind of movement that the satellites have. In fact, they stop and they change directions. And even though some of our satellites do have thrusters on them to change orbit and change direction, they don't respond that quickly.
No.
But plenty of people will tell you that that's all it was. But you're used to that by now. Irena, it's been terrific having you on the show again. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. But also, I want to keep in touch, and I want to. Where can people find your book? You have it on Amazon?
Yeah,
Books?
it's on Amazon.
So all they have to do is look up your name.
Uh-huh.
And did you haven't in those books published what you shared with us tonight in closing?
Yeah, I published that in my own experience.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that one's on Amazon or not right now.
Yeah.
It's called Inside the Lightning Ball, and that's my own experience. I don't know. I guess you can't see
Inside the Lightning Ball.
it. It may not be on Amazon right now.
But your website would lead them to where to find the book. Okay, that's good. So, well, I really look
I think
forward.
it's not available. I think it's on Amazon, though. I don't know if it's available.
Oh, okay. So it may be out of print right now.
Yeah.
We got to put it back up because I'd like to read it myself. So,
I'll send it
wow,
to you.
I really look forward to seeing what you do next with this amazing field of interest that goes against all science.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And everyone here thanks you too for being the guest tonight and having this amazing conversation. It was really incredible.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, we're going to sign off, and thanks for being here and thanks for your support. And we'll see you next Thursday. It'll just be me, but there will be a interview, a show recorded every Friday as usual. There just won't be chat and won't be live. So again, Irena, thank you so much. I'm going to end the stream.
Thank you.